Presenting with me today is Chris McClaskey. We are both the customer support account managers for the DACRA SMS system. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. Today, we will be talking about the following adaptive reports. We'll be talking about exposure analysis, exposure stats, and the Pareto report. After the webinar, we will send out the link to the webinar on your YouTube channel in an email. You can also access the link by going to YouTube and searching DACRA Management Systems. At this time, all phone lines are muted, so if you have questions, you can use the chat feature, which is located at the top of the page. So if you're looking at our little webinar, you can see there's two little people up there. Right next to that is our chat feature. Once the webinar is over, we will discuss those questions that we've received from the attendees. So let's get started. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chris McClaskey.
Thanks, Carla. All right, just getting everything going here. So yeah, I'll be covering exposure stats and exposure analysis and then hand it over to Carla. So let me get my screen shared here. Let me pull up with this one. I do apologize if my dog starts barking through part of this. So just wanted to full warn in case he does, but I think we'll be okay. So I'm going to go to the reports page here. So like I said, I'm going to be covering exposure stats and the exposure analysis report. One note, if you are looking, if you're following along or something on your own profile, and if you don't see exposure analysis, you can definitely reach out to your adaptive manager, so an admin, you know, at your company, or holler at your account manager. This one is a fairly new report, so just keep that in mind. It is a permission just to turn it on. So if you don't see it, definitely give us a holler, give your admin a holler. But these two are pretty similar reports. I say similar kind of loosely, but I'll kind of cover everything, talk about it, show you kind of the differences, and we'll talk about those. So first thing I'm going to cover is exposure stats. So we'll let this load here. So right when you log in, if you notice from kind of recently any of our reports, you log in and you're not seeing anything right off the bat, we turned the auto run off. And that was just because a lot of the bigger clients, with a lot of locations, you know, putting a lot of observations in per month, you know, it really takes a long time to load. And we didn't want, you know, a year date range right when someone logs in and, you know, they're putting in a couple thousand observations a month and it just bogs down, doesn't run. So we turn the auto run off, so you're able to change. You can update your date ranges, you know, if you want to go this month, last month, if you are one of those that has a lot of observations. You can also update your filters too, and then hit search. So just keep that in mind when you first log in. You know, if you are kind of newer and don't see that, just keep that in mind. But I'm just going to go ahead and search. So I just want a year date range for us. So right off the bat, we notice that we're looking at 50 sheets here. We do have this chart up top that just kind of shows us, you know, how many have been entered in a certain period of time. You can kind of see on those given days, see how many safes were entered, how many at risk. If I notice on this kind of in August, I can take kind of a zoomed in look, and you're able to use the arrows here. And if we just want to look at August, I can see kind of this bump in our at risk. So you're able to kind of zoom in, look at those, just double check to see, you know, what's going on. Is it at the end of the month? What was going on, you know, during that time frame? You can also kind of move it out if I want to see my scale over here of kind of higher safes. You know, just check kind of the trends that you're looking at. So you are able to move those around, take a look at those, and just highlight over each of those data points. You can also print this chart, and then you can also download it to as an image and a PDF document, or download it to Excel. So you do have those options for this chart. And this will update off of your date range as well as filters. So if you're looking at safes, you only see safes up top, same thing with at risk, or if you're pulling in specific departments, things like that, it'll filter it out. But that is our chart up top. Down below here, we do have kind of the main meat of this report, and this pulls in our exposures. So I'm running two different checklists for us for here. So you'll notice some of these may not have numbers, things like that. So pulling in two different checklists just for us to look at. But what this does, and you notice, hey, we're not fully going off our 1.1, 2, 3, 4. What this does is it sorts it by at risk. So we want to show you those most at risk exposures first, just so you can take a look at those, see those. You can, if you want to, filter this. We want to see them in the order of our checklist. You can filter that out. You can also go bottom up, things like that, just different options that you can click through. But through here, we do have these in our columns here. Some of these are pretty similar to exposure analysis, but they're ran a little differently. Our number observed here is kind of pulling in how many of our safes and at risk. So these are just a tad bit off from what our exposure analysis has, where our number observed here, 55, we have our total of 40 safe, our 15 at risk, things like that. So it's just pulling in those. We want to make sure that those are matching up. And like I said, our number observed, sheets, and marked, those will be a little different in that exposure analysis. So I kind of prefer the analysis one over our exposure stats, just because some of these areas like barriers and SIF, and when we're looking at SIF here, this is from Decker's features. It's not a given flag that we have created for you or is that's on your checklist, a flag or variable of SIF. It is a adaptive setting that is SIF. So that'll count how many times that's been selected. Same thing with barrier if you have that turned on. But for this report, there's no way to hide those, where in that exposure analysis, I can kind of show you if you're not using those, we can hide those out. But this one here, showing your marks, same thing with your percentage safe as well as percentage at risk. This is really what you want to be focusing on in our exposure stats report. And you'll notice too on my 4.2 here, we do have a kind of red highlighted number, and if I keep my cursor there, it says high. So this means that it is a high risk exposure. So anytime that there is an at risk for confined space, you can have an alert. Anytime you pull 4.2, it will have that the high risk kind of mark there. So something to keep in mind, that is a feature that you can turn on. So give us a holler at your admin, to get that turned on. That's under the exposures page where you can kind of mark out what exposures you want to deem as high risk. But from this list, it's pretty straightforward information. Again, you're able to count your safes, count your at risk, as well as looking at your safe and at risk percentage. From this report, you can export to Excel and PDF. That's right from the top of the page. Kind of main things right here from this grid. If we scroll down here, we also have a little pretty straightforward kind of generic comment report. So any of these, some of these could be safes that we're looking at that doesn't have an exposure comment. It could be, since we are on a test site here, it could be just some at risk that didn't get an exposure comment in there. But one of the ways that you can find these is if you want to take and just looking for your exposure comments, if I click on this, drag it up top, I'm able to, I can hide then all of those that don't have a comment. Oops, hold on here. Let me open up my window. Let's do 500 here. There we go. Now you get moved back down. If I drag my column up here, there we go. I can hide all those that don't have a comment. Now I can look through and find any exposures that do have a comment. So it's just grouping them off of, the same comments that are in there. Obviously, all of them are different, but now I'm able to look and see what comments that I have. I can kind of group it that way. If I want to, I can also group by our exposures here. So it kind of lines them up that way. But if you're wanting to look at something specific, you can hide, line of fire or pinch points. I know those are some of our main ones that we really hit on with our testing site, since they're kind of the first ones. But you are able to group those out. If I pull over on our report here, Any of these observer or reviewer comments, those ones are just the general comment boxes that are underneath your variables section, or the extra forms, you know, you have your filling out on your actual checklist. It's on that left-hand side of our page, but we can also filter by the observer and group that too. So if I wanted to group by observer, I can pull this in here. Now I can see by observer those comments as well. Admin's probably going to have a lot, again, from our test site. So I can see what comments are coming in here from those. I can also hit view. So I'll open this in another tab. And I can pull open that checklist as well and take a look. So you get a quick comment report. I personally, if you're looking at comments, you can get your quick, you know, understanding what the exposure was from your report and what that at risk was. But if you're wanting to find a good comment report, I would definitely use our observations comment report too. But this one's going to give you good information. You just won't see all of the extra, you know, departments, areas, shifts, seeing what behavior types as well, what flags and variables were used. So this one gives you quick information, but again, I probably prefer that as a comment report. But from here, you are able to pull that any way that you group it. You know, you can export that to Excel as well. But from here, there's a couple of those. You can hide columns on here. So within, you know, if you're not doing reviews, things like that, you can take some of those areas out. So if I don't want to view our reviewers, now I can just see my observer comments as well as that observer and really get a quick look. So that's kind of straightforward right when you pull in. If I scroll up here, we can get into filtering. And from this, like I said, I have my two checklists. There's a lot of filtering that can be done for this. One of the main ones is going to our exposure result. And in here, choosing your at risk and only looking at the at risk. So this is an easy way on, you know, our chart. You make that a little more, what's the word I want to say, a little more defined. You can see the, you know, the jumps a little higher, you know, from your 1. Anything that's over a 1 really gets noticed on this page. If I scroll down, obviously we'll see no safes here. We're only looking at our at risks. But now that if I go to the bottom, here I'm able to see every single at-risk comment that I have from that time frame. So again, really able to take a look at those, filter it out just for your at-risk. If you do want to, you can filter by your exposure. So line of fire, if you want to hide those, you can get in and look at everything else. Again, can be exported. You can hide some of these other columns if you don't need it. All to each your own. Same thing in filtering again. You can look at specific, if you want to see anything that's been reviewed. If you only want to look at high risks, I can see those true. And then now I'm only going to pull the high risk. So if you have a high risk report, I know for one of my clients, I've pulled those and kind of have that saved as a filter. So you can have that. Just a quick refresher on saving filters. So for this one, if I want to save as a high risk, I can rename this. High risk exposures, hit save as new filter. Now this will be saved. I can have this through here. Go back to my default since it was the last thing I viewed. That'll be on my default, but something to keep in mind there, just on saving filters compared to updating. We can also take a look at specific departments. So if I want to see just what's been done in maintenance, I can do that as well. Can get our reports for that. A lot going on over June, July, August, October through there. That date range has a lot of data. Obviously, for you guys listening as a company, you're going to get a lot more data than what we have here. So anything that you pull, you're going to get a lot of good information and then see a lot of those good numbers that you can find. I'm trying to think anything else here. Area shifts, those are all. And these two, when we're pulling them, keep in mind when you're looking at these, we have observation areas. There is some where you can see the observer. So differences, if you have observers tied to areas, departments, or shifts, you can have those. For this report, you know, all we have is just where the observation was done at. And from this, that is the exposure stats. So like I said, it's pretty straightforward. This has been one of our older reports, so it is something that a lot of people have been using before, but you can find good information. Like I said, percentage safe, safe, percent at risk, and at risk are going to be the main things that you're really looking at from this, and getting those quick comments. I am going to hop back to reports now, and we're going to cover exposure analysis. This one we're going to look at a little longer since it is new. Second one down should be second one down for everyone. I'm going to hit view on that. And this one I'm going to show you just kind of all the little differences from exposure stats, as well as just kind of everything that we have. So when you first log in on exposure analysis, if it is your first time running this, again, you have your date range. Mine is just year to date here. We have different groupings. So we have a first grouping, and then we have a second grouping. So we have group by, then by. So your first grouping, what I would do personally, just from the first time, is scroll through this list and find your exposure category and exposure name. So our first grouping is going to be exposure category. I'm going to scroll up and then go to exposure name. And I am going to hit search here. So here we have our kind of original. I'm going to open our kind of areas up. If you are working on a smaller screen, so if you have a, you're working on a laptop, things like that, and if you notice like how this was, same thing with like at the end here, that it looks like it's kind of cut off, you are able to, if you just hover over, you're able to move your columns. So if you want to bring those out, move them down a little bit, we are able to do those. So keep that in mind. And then when you export that out as well, if you do it to Excel, just to get a better look at it, you're able to manipulate it a little bit more. You are able to move those out. But for while you're here, you can, if you just hover over in between columns, you can move those. But so here is where you notice kind of the same kind of look as what exposure stats has. The first difference right off the bat is, since we're grouping by exposure category, that is one thing that exposure stats does not have, is the exposure category. So we are able to do that. If you just want to look at your categories and just see the data for those, you can hide them from there, but you can also run the same report and you're able to see that data for each category that you have. Let me go back down, pull in our exposures as well. So you'll notice, so we have an arrow on the left-hand side. You can bring these down and then you get the same report that I just ran, except you have the data within each. So you can hide those, kind of open, close them. Let me get everything open here. I'm going to kind of cover each of these columns, let you know what each of them kind of does. I'm going to open up just a little bit of notes for me on the side. So our number observed for our first column, that is the number of people observed. If you don't track it on your sheet, then what it's going to do is it will default this to one person, so one person observed per one sheet. But obviously, if you have the number observed and you bring in 2, 3 observed in your observations, it's going to bring those in. So for our body positioning, for our total, there's only 19 observed for our date range that we're looking at. The next is the number of sheets, and that would just be the number of observations. So somewhere along the line, we had one observation that probably had 2 people observed in there. So percentage of sheets, that's just going to be 100%. And then with our number marked, so the number marked is the number of times the exposure is marked safe, at risk, or barrier, just depending on what selections that you have. If you do have multiple occurrences or exposure states, so multiple occurrences would be that you can mark a safe as, say with our example of observing 3 people, with the multiple occurrences, you can have, 3 safes rather than just selecting it as a safe or at risk. You can mark that you had 3 safes, or if you had 2 safe, 1 at risk, that would be occurrences. So if you have a number by your safe or at risk when you're doing your observations, that means occurrences is on. As well as if you would have different exposure states, those would still be calculated within there. But going along with kind of that definition, it's just the number of times that an exposure is marked. So we have here 54 safe, 5 at risk, 0 barrier. So 54 plus 5 would be your 59. So that's just your number marked of how many times within here your line of fire was marked. So 17 times, it was 15 safe, and then 2 at risk. And then here of your, your percentage safe and percentage at risk. So we have our 15 and 2. That would then be just the percentages of each of those getting marked each time, and then our percentage marked as well. So 17 out of the 18 sheets, they were marked, and that would be a 94% for those. And just on these, number safe, number at risk, kind of your main things that you want to look at. You are able to group those in bold by your categories. So now we get on to our barrier SIF. We're not using that with our checklist, so I can go ahead, remove these out. You click the 3 dots, it'll bring up columns. And in here, I want to remove barrier SIF. Next, we have number of exposures. And this one is a little different, and it's used more for a total calculation rather than by itself. So the number of exposures to get our 90 there is the number of exposure items times the number of sheets. So this one's more for a total number rather than looking at these individually. Honestly, every time that I come in and run these for any of my clients, I just hide my number of exposures too. And then your number of occurrences. Again, if you're not using occurrences in the system, it should be the same as your number marked. So looks like these match up as 59. So in here, looks like probably the number of our occurrences wasn't on for this checklist. So for these last 2 columns, I can hide these as well. So now I'm only looking at my percentage at risk, my number at risk, percentage safe, number marked, percentage mark, everything else. So we're able to get a nice good kind of grouping of these and then kind of remove all that extra data that we really don't need. So here's pretty much your same exposure stats report. You're just able to get it in a little bit better look with a little bit more information. And as you notice too, down here at the bottom, we have our complete totals for the whole checklist. So 64 of the exposures were marked. We have 54 safe, 10 at risk. So getting those different numbers out of the 18th sheet of 19 people observed. And then up top too, you get a total percentage that's marked as well as your total number of sheets. So that is all across the top. And then exporting too, you notice that there isn't an export at the top of the grid. Anytime that you see a report that doesn't have it at the top, come over next to the filter and we can export this. And a cool thing about our export as well is when we pull this open at the top on this, we have our report, what our date range was, and then it gives us our total number of sheets as well as our total percentage mark. So you get a date range with that as well as your reports. And then from here too, again, you can filter these out. You can run any personal type of graphs, things like that with these. Gets you a lot of good information that you can use. So now, other than just kind of our look at the exposure stats, there's a lot of different areas and a lot of different things that you can group by. So I'm just going to go to the top. Obviously, we have a no grouping. That's always at the top. But what is all in here would be your variables flags. So anything from a form that has been, custom made that we've made for you, that is all listed in here, as well as observation data. So it's a lot of the same as kind of what you can group by an ad hoc. What you can kind of use in there, it kind of has a lot of that same information. So a lot of this in here, we have our aware, because, things like that, day of weeks that we have with our variables. We keep going here, our exposure category and name. These ones are kind of our main ones, that we want right off the bat to view like this report with. Some of these are pulling in a lot from different checklists, but number observed, we can pull this in and, group by number observed. We have our observation areas, dates, department. We just got added observation month, so you are able to view by months for these. We have our observation shifts, our types there, are the observation years. So if you're looking at a whole lot of data, Keep in mind, if you do use observation year, just know that it'll probably take a little bit to load. And then for observer views, so we do have a lot of different options for those. So if you just want to run a report, send it out of just observer ID, you can do that only. We can also do internal ID only. You get your name and ID, name and internal ID, or just name only. And then you can pull anywhere that observers are attached to areas, departments, shifts, so you get those. And then also organization units, probably one of the last, let me look here. Yep, organization units, kind of one of the last adaptive given kind of categories. And then the rest is just based off your flags and variables. So those custom forms that you add in there. So a couple different ones that we can run. I'll do one with just that name only, so we can just take a look at that. So a good observer report to get, those stats for those observers, we can see just from our date range, we get a look, and this is just pulling by name. If I do name and internal ID, can kind of get the same thing. It'll just pull that. Whoops, probably ran that too fast. Let me back out here and refresh the page. I think I pulled this in too quick on them. So let me hit view here. Go back in. I'm just going to do our observer name just so we get that grouping and search. So here we got our observer name, but here given the same sets of data, so you can see what they're, who's looking at, what they're looking at, seeing any at risk. So if there's any with a higher at risk, maybe they're not understanding kind of your guys's philosophy, or if you have a lot of hundreds, obviously with only having one observation, can't go off that. But if someone is, has quite a few sheets that are in there for your time frame and all of them are 100%, definitely something to think about. But this is another report that you can use. Another one that we can run would be our observation month. So new filter here. Then we can look at our names as well. So if you want to see by month what the observers are entering, you can get that kind of the same breakdown, only though pulling it in through the months as well. So looking at it that way. Also with the month, if you want to look at departments, kind of what departments we're having observations done in, you can get that breakdown as well. I'm only doing just a handful here just for our purposes, but after this meeting, when you guys are looking at it, you get your time to take a look at reports, definitely come in here and play around with each of the groupings. Another one as well, we can pull one of our variables. I know that I have just a couple with weather condition in here, but you are able to pull a little bit of data like that. And so here you can see weather condition was rainy. You're able to take a look at those per month. But if I flip back to say department, I want my observation department, and we can keep it by month. You can filter on top of your grouping. So if you're looking at, for this one, our months, and say I want to add in my area as well. Say I want to see, what departments we're working out at the maintenance. Let me go at the loading dock. Let me see if I can get any data for that. So we had administration out there at the loading dock working. So this adds that on to what you're already filtering by. So you're able to group by your month and department, kind of take a look at that, as well as put in your observed areas. We can take a look at warehouse too, see if we get anything different. So we have a lot more in that area of the warehouse. So you're able to put on top and build kind of different filters. Again, I would have everything just saved as a filter for this. So for this one, you can name it observation month. Your observation month by department at warehouse. I would keep that saved just so then that filter is saved in there with it. And you kind of have everything saved there. So just something to think about with those. But that one is everything with our exposure analysis report. I am going over to Carla. So if you guys have any questions, put them in the chat box. We'll be sure to get them at the end too, especially anything over you've seen here. We can cover that right at the end. So I'm going to unshare my screen here.
All right, so today I'm going to be covering the Pareto chart. And hang on just a second, let me get all my screens up here so I can see them. All right, so to get to the Pareto chart, you're going to go into reports just like before, and you're going to go down to the bottom here and you'll see the Pareto chart. So the first thing I want to do is kind of explain the Pareto Rule. So if you ever have a question what the Pareto Rule is, go on to Google, search that. It's got lots and lots of information about it. It's used many different ways in many different industries. So the one that we're going to kind of focus on is actually going to be towards the occupational health and safety professionals. And they use the Pareto Principle to underline the importance of hazard prioritization, assuming 20% of the hazards account for 80% of the injuries. And by categorizing hazards, safety professionals can target those 20% of the hazards that cause 80% of the injuries or accidents. Alternatively, if hazards are addressed in random order, a safety professional is more likely to fix one of the 80% of the hazards that account only for some fraction of the remaining 20% of injuries. So what we want to do is to reduce the hazards or the at risk so that we can reduce those injuries. So that's what we're going to do when we're looking at this. And I'm going to try to show you how you can do that in this report. So this is the Pareto chart. It's blank because obviously I haven't hit the search button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you're going to see what comes up across the top here is all the different checklists that we have in our demo site. We got a couple extra more that I didn't even have on here. I filtered them out. So just like Chris said, the first thing you want to do, come in, put in your date range. You see there's a lot of choices over here on the left-hand side. You can do a custom date range. I am going back to 2019, so we had some more data back then, so that's why it's back that far. Over here on the right side, this is kind of important for using this report for the Pareto purpose. You want to come in here and do one thing. So you want to filter out all the at-risk. And that's what I've done in here, or barriers if you're using barriers also. But you can do that in here just by simply picking at risk. I did select certain checklists to show today just to make the screen not so large. And then when you're done putting that, I did have a filter saved in here. So I called it at-risk Pareto chart. I saved it as that new filter. And then it will populate this information out here. Now, over on the right-hand side, you're going to see these three lines. Just like when Chris was doing some of his, there is the option of exporting these. Now, the only thing it does is it will export only the screen you're sitting on. So it won't export the next level that we're going to be looking at. So you'll have to do it for each one of those. But you can see you can export to different types of images or PDFs and things like that. So the first thing I want to explain is over on the left-hand side is this is all the observations. This is how many observations each one of these checklists has put in. Across the bottom is all the checklist names. This is the Pareto line you see going through the center of this, which we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. And then over here on the right-hand side is the accumulation by percentage of all of these different checklists that we're looking at. So I don't like to look at the Pareto line until I get to the next layer. So we're going to do that right now. So in this report, you're going to notice that it is a interactive report, so you can click on it. So if I click on the CBI checklist, you're going to see that it'll bring up the categories. So here's all the different categories that have been marked at risk for the CBI checklist. You can see across the line here, as you go from here's 0 down here on the left, 64% of them are at risk are coming from this body position category right now. And with what I said before, we're looking for 80% for this. We like to look at 80%, it gets more and helps you kind of reduce some of those injuries. So as I scroll up the line, you're going to see this number right here change. So it's at 64 right now. As we scroll up the line, it's at 76. And we pass up 80% and hit 87% right here. So with using that rule, I would probably take the first two categories here and focus on them first. I didn't say forget these. I just said we're going to focus on these two first. So the first one I'm going to just go ahead and click on is the body position one. Once I click on body position, it brings up all the exposures. You can see those across the bottom. And again, we got that blue line going through the middle. I'm going to do the exact same thing with exposures. I'm going to go up the line until I see 80%, which is right around in this area right here. So we're going to focus on these first two right here. So let me take a look at pinch points first. So when I click on pinch points, you're going to notice there's 20 at-risk pinch points. that people have entered into the system. As I scroll down to the bottom of this screen, you're going to see all the different observations that have selected an at-risk for pinch points. And you can see our data going across the top. This is everything that you kind of have in that observation that you have selected. So you can see those. The best thing I can tell you to do when you come into this, just like Chris was talking about with the exposure stats report, is coming in here and using the observer exposure comments or any of the comment boxes that we do have populated in here. We have observer comments, exposure comments. I think we have reviewer comments, and kind of take a look at those, because that's usually where the bulk of the information that you're wanting to look at is. Like, you're wanting to see what's going on. And I had a good example of this, but I cannot find it again. Who had it? I was looking at a client's information the other day, and I noticed there was a trend in their exposure comments, and that trend was that they had all these people going out and doing these jobs, but each one of them had this comment in there that says their ladder is too short to perform their job. So they were doing things a little bit unsafe because their ladders are too short and they need longer ones or taller ones. So I seen that, and it was like a repeating one throughout the whole comment box. I saw that in there. I've also seen a lot in one of the industries I was looking at, had a lot with safety goggles. They weren't wearing their safety goggles. Seems to be a recurring problem with everybody, probably, because nobody likes to wear things that they don't have to, just like masks. Nobody likes to wear the mask, but we still do right now. So that's kind of something that you can take a look at in here, and you can look at any of these across here that may help you kind of look at your data and try to figure out if you can do something to get rid of some of these at-risk to keep reoccurring. So like Chris said in here, you can do several things. When he had his charts up, there is this 3 dots where you can get rid of a few things. You can sort ascending, descending for any of the columns across the top. Also, with this report, we have a lot more of the columns. So you may want to get rid of the ones you don't use. If you're not going to be using them, you can uncheck them. And then over here on the left-hand side, this will actually take you to the observation that we're sitting on. So this one right here, I could go to and look at it if you wanted to do that. So that's a really good way of taking a look at that. Also, over here on the right-hand side, you'll notice that this kind of changes as you go down the report. So if I wanted to go back to the exposure level, because I'm done with pinch points, I want to look at line of fire. I click on line of fire, and now I have a whole new set of reports down here at the bottom, or set of observations at the bottom. So that's kind of what the Pareto report does. Now, it doesn't mean you have to use it exactly for that. It's just what that blue line that goes through the center of it actually means. So if you wanted to come in, you could get rid of that exposure results, update the report, and you can see how many observations you're done for each one of these different checklists. So you can see that across here and see how many they've been doing. So that's one thing you can actually use it for instead of using it with the at-risk filter on. So that pretty much tells you everything I can tell you about the Pareto chart, but there is one more thing we're going to cover today, and that is the help files up at the top of the page. Seems to be some people just don't ever remember about these, but I wanted to point out some new stuff that's been put in these help files. So I'm going to click on the question mark at the top of the page. It's going to bring us to our help library, and in our help library, you're going to see several things. First of all, we have recently been getting some help with some of our Spanish translations. So he actually is finishing out some of our step-by-step reports that he's been typing out for us and getting them so they're in Spanish also. So that is something new that's coming. We probably aren't quite there yet with everything, and same with all the other stuff. We're still adding all the time to this little area and changing some of them out, so keep that in mind. Also in here, we've done some new things that maybe you haven't noticed is we've added adaptive videos. So anything that you see in this list, and we have more coming, because I know there's 2 that are coming right now that I just finished, that you can come in here, click on it, and if you don't know anything about the dashboard features, you can play this video. It'll take you step by step through it, and it's a great way to learn if you have forgotten something. So we wanted to make sure we did. You know, we have a Pareto chart one in there. We have a couple reports in there to help you guys out if you don't know how to run one or forget how to filter or anything like that. Those should probably tell you each one of those in there about that information. So those are in there. We also talk a little bit about our mobile apps in here. So we do have a mobile app, and it does have a step-by-step video in there also, and you know, the procedures also, so you can walk through it and just read it. So those are some new things that we've added over here to this side that you guys might not have noticed have been added, or you may have forgot about the help file, so we just wanted to point that out. At this time, we are going to allow you guys to unmute your phone. You guys can, I believe you can unmute your phone. If you can't, go ahead and put your chat in the chat box. I know we had one come in, and I'm going to assume Chris is going to answer that one because I think it's probably a question you might know the answer to.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to let you do that.
I was going to say, I think David may have hopped off, but if not, I'll say it anyways too. So he had asked, when will it be possible to filter that exposure analysis by the company observed? And I know that's one of my guys, and that's one of their variables. And looked on, it is in there. It'll be alphabetically, so it was listed on C on company being observed. So just wanted to let you know that, David. It is in there. I can send you some screenshots too afterwards. But for anyone that does want to look at a specific, flag or variable that they have set up on their checklist on exposure analysis, it's just filtered alphabetically. So whatever that first letter starts with, that's where you'll find it at, and then you can get all those same numbers for that. And yeah, Brian said that videos won't come up on the iPad, so we will investigate that, get a ticket in if we can't get that to figure out.
Anybody else have a question?
I could ask a question. For the Pareto chart, on the left side, it's the observation count. Is that observation count able to be labeled so that it's more clear for the users what they're looking for? As say, and maybe this is an and/or can the total number of observations be added to the dialog box that pops up when you hover over one of the bar graphs in the Pareto chart?
Great question, Dan. So you want us to add like a label over here so you know what this is over here on the left-hand side. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about.
Yes, and the and/or would be when you hover right there, or if that could populate the actual number of observations, that would be even better, because like at that 800 to 1,000 chart right there, you're kind of guessing if you're close to 900, or it'd be awesome if that was able to be done to give you an exact count of what you're looking at for observation comparison.
Okay, we will take note of that and see what we can do.
And then yeah, for this video, we are recording it. I'll be sure to let everyone know. We will get this up on our YouTube site, just so you can get it there. But for you, Murphy, I can get that sent out. And anyone too that would like the recording, you can definitely holler at your account manager. We can get that sent to you guys. And then Brian, for the videos too, are you meaning like the help files? Because I was going to say we have those too, just in a file that if you holler for account managers, we can definitely get those sent out to everyone. Yeah, yep. Just give us a holler. We can get those sent out too. If anyone needs any of those help file videos, we do have those just as well. If you'd like to have them just on hand, we can get those out.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, when you were doing either the exposure analysis or the exposure stats, you kind of went kind of fast, but you did show that you could, instead of the way it shows up, you could manipulate it to where you could put line of fire at the bottom or
yeah,
vice versa. But it went kind of fast, so I couldn't pick up.
Yeah, I apologize on that. Yeah, on here, within the exposure stats too, there's just that column name. And here, Carla, I can.
You want to take over?
Share my screen for it, yeah. Before that, Jamie, let me go. I can show you on that exposure stats. Let me take a look at analysis. But on exposure stats here, we'll view this.
There's also another question that came in, and it was, how do you get to our YouTube channel? If you go to YouTube, you search DACRA SMS. Isn't that what it says? I think. You can actually get to that. I want to make sure I said that right. Yeah, DACRA Management Systems. Sorry. DACRA management systems, then inside there, you're going to want to search the search box. We have a lot of videos in there that not only apply to our adaptive system, they also apply to our SMS system if you guys are users of that. So you'll have to search probably for the adaptive videos. But this one will be up right after we get the recording done. Usually it doesn't take too long to get that posted for you guys. And then we'll get those links set out also so you guys have a quick link to it at any moment.
Yep.
Go ahead,
And
Chris.
for filtering on this, so on the exposure name, you notice when I hover, my pointer goes to a finger. So here you can get it flipped to where it'll go kind of numerically as well. If we switch it, you are able to do it through there. So it's just clicking through on our exposure name as well on here. And then on exposure analysis, let me see. We may be able to do that there. It may just be stationary too. Let me see. I'm just going to group that by, go up by exposure name, hit search. And then this one stays the same, but if you pull this into Excel, you can kind of manipulate it that way. So exposure stats is the one, you can just click on that exposure name and it will then kind of filter out for you like that.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Does anyone else have any questions, anything like that?
Yeah, Chris, I had a question.
Yep.
Hey, you was talking about on the exposure stats how to enable the SIF category or the SIF column.
Yeah.
Can you show us how to do that?
Yeah, we can look at that really quick. So where that is, and this would be when you would enter a comment, so whether it be safe at risk, if you go to administration, then your feature setup, and then if you click your BBS tab, and then it'll be by checklist. So if we manage that, and then here you can see our huge list and our test site. So we'll do this top one, the critical behavior inventory, but you just go actions and edit. And then here we'll scroll to the bottom of the page here. And then on this right-hand side, so this checklist exposure features. So again, in the exposures, so whether you're doing a safe or at-risk comment, we have here enable SIF option. So you just click that to, if it's not clicked, just click that. And then you can come down here and save. And then now I'm going to open an observation just so you can see what it looks like. Let me get on the correct checklist here. So we can open up, just since this is a safe still. So now here we just have SIF. So this is one where if you do turn this on or you want to use it just for, you know, for your exposure stats or exposure analysis, we can definitely create, you know, if you want one where it has potential, you know, if it is a SIF, if it, you know, we can have that as a selection. You can have SIF potential or non-SIF potential, just so you have that kind of ability to filter those out. We can create, you know, an extra flag to go in here, but this, clicking this is what will, you know, mark those for that exposure stats and exposure analysis to get that count up. So you can have this along with something else, so you'd be able to filter a little bit more, but it is just a SIF button there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Anybody else have any questions? All right, well, we'll let you guys get back to your day. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you.